We will learn how websites work, what is phenomena, working principles behind a website, and how these browsers are able to render or view these websites as they are. And three-tier architecture is a simple one. How typical website is works, where this is how typical website works, where we have actually three things are there: client tier, logic tier, and data tier. And they are also referred as a presentation tier, logic tier, and database tier. Where um, what this presentation tier involves, which is typically a browser. Browser is the one in a presentation tier that is typically a client for a website, browser, and for websites, where application which contains application tag contains a web application that is made up of Python, Django, or Python Flask, or Ruby on Rails, or anything. And database tier involves different types of databases. What are different types of databases? There are different types of databases. We don't get into different types of databases that are actually relational, non-SQL, the object, uh, network databases, hierarchical, flat file system database, and object database, different types of databases, but key value stores, document databases. But here, uh, RDBMS relational databases, they are quite popular. What they are actually, those are SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, PostgreSQL, and MariaDB. These are different types of relational databases. Typically, the mostly websites use relational databases. Uh, so here, these relational databases are a part of what is called a data tier. So as you can see here, presentation tier, logic tier, and data tier. So data tier contain the databases, and logic tier or business logic tier. So we call them as a application, presentation layer, business logic layer, and data layer. So it involves a web server and web application server and web server. And where the presentation server, where the browser you see, which is actually that it is a presentation layer or presentation tier, where typically what is in presentation tier, which is a browser. So where web browser is referred as a client, web client or web browser. So what are different types of browsers? Different types of browsers we have seen here already. Types of browsers are, yes, there are a lot of browsers, but you see here, these are major browsers: Internet Explorer, Opera, the Netscape is which is no longer active and development nobody uses now, but which is one of the pioneer in internet, bringing up a lot of things that we use today. So Mozilla Firefox, Safari, Google Chrome, Opera, Netscape, and these are actually Android browser, and there are a lot of browsers. So, and there is actually the one I am using now, which is a Brave browser. The Brave is based on uh, Firefox. Sorry, my bad. Brave is based on Google Chrome. Google Chrome. So these are different types of major browsers. So how this website works? You see here the three tier architecture we have seen how it works. Let me show it to you. So in this three-tier architecture, do you see the presentation layer? So in the presentation layer, what do we have? We have called a browser. The where browser or client, which what it does, it sends a request to the server. And server process that request, and if data is required to process that request, server or application, we call it as a web server or applications server, which makes a request to makes a request to the database server. So what database server does, it sends response to the how this Application server or web server, they make a request to the database server by using SQL query. So it sends the SQL query. So in a database request, and in a response, response to the query is computed and it is sent to as a response to the application server. And it processes that request, and if any templates needs to be processed and filled with the data, or if it is API request, and the data, the server prepares the response with the data retrieved from the database server, and it will send in a back to the presentation layer, or a client. So what is how this presentation layer and the business layer, they communicate? That is where our protocol HTTP comes into picture. So let me show it to you how it works. And so I hope you can see my screen. So we have seen here. You can see here, see it. So we have seen three-tier architecture. What is three-tier architecture? Which is simple. So we have three things. One is presentation layer. Yeah, presentation layer or a tier. And second one, logic. Yeah. And third one is data. Data. Data tier or data layer. So they are, it is called a data structure. So what this presentation layer, presentation tier contains basically a browser. Okay. So browser is called, what browser is called? A client, right? This is a browser, which can be a Chrome or Firefox. So what it's saying, which is a presentation layer, right? What it does, it sends a request. So how do you send? We are actually communicating in language called English, which is spoken language. There are different types, hundreds of languages, thousands. So how they communicate? It sends a request to the server. So we have server, right? Where we have server. This is just a computer, but it contains a. It is presentation layer and a logic layer. What it involves, which is called a front end, website front end, which is, we call it as a website front end. Okay, why it is called website front end? Because this is what users see, right? Okay, so what this user interacts or sees through browser, right? Whatever they see is actually whatever is displayed in a browser. So which is called a front end, website front end. What it is called? Website backend. So front end developer, there are two types of people: front end developer and back end developer. So front end developers take care of this one. This one. What back end developers take care of? This one. Back end developers creates, and they both actually integrate. This is where actually integration testing comes into, because API testing, where both needs to be actually, because this provides something called API, application programming interface. API stands for Application Programming Interface. This backend logic tier provides API to the front end presentation. So the front end developer creates a request according to the APIs that is provided, so that server can understand. And how this what protocol? What is protocol? Protocol means set of rules and standards. Basically, protocol is made up of three things, which is syntax, semantics, and timing. The syntax means how this data should be structured. Semantics means how to interpret them, and timing means when to send message and how to send. That is the protocol is made up of three things. And what protocol? So what protocol is used for a communication between the presentation tier and logic tier, which is HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, where it is request response protocol. So where client sends a request, always client sends a request. So let's say that you went to the hotel. Okay, so who is a client? You, restaurant, and there is a server. So he is like a server. Yeah, imagine how server this works like this. There are four clients. Your friend, and someone else, and someone else. These people are sitting in different four tables. Okay, or two tables. Okay, and there is a waiter. Okay, or a server, one person. So who will ask here? The waiter will ask. Sometimes if it is a self-service, imagine. Okay, it's not actually. It is a self-service, and there is actually count. And who will ask first for actually token or to get it something? You will go and ask this, right? This person. They will not come and ask you, right? Okay. So because imagine it is a self-service, not actually they won't go and serve you. And in such a case, all these people go and ask this person, right? How this person will respond to them? Because imagine all of them are requests. Okay, so this guy is requesting for a, let's say, burger. This guy is requesting for sandwich. He's requesting for a, let's say, ice cream. He's requesting for a pizza. Okay, and so how they are served according to the order in which they are actually requested. First comes first served, so that they will be served. They will be given tokens accordingly, right? So what are these? What are these? These are responses, right? Got it? So request response. So there is a one server, the one counter only, but all clients come and ask. They ask their request. They put their request to single counter only, right? And so all of them are served in a response. How their requests are actually, how the requests are processed, the in which the requests are arrived. First comes first served. Do you understand this analogy? Do you understand this analogy? Yeah. So same way, imagine we are accessing, there is a Google server. The Google server, we call it as a server. Okay. So why? Because single, that is single, there is a google.com only, single google.com only. Okay. Just imagine this is like counter. There are how many browsers are accessing Google now? Millions, right? Okay. From mobile, tablet, okay, and system or laptop. What are these? Of course, no matter what browser you take, what client you take, that can be actually mobile, tablet, browser, system, desktop, TV. So behind the scenes, it is a client that communicates to the server. That can be a browser, one form or another. Do you get it? Yeah. So one form or another, that is a client, that raises a request to the server. So what server does, server will respond. So which is like a Google server. So you open the Google. So if I go here, I open the Google here, right? Let's say I went to the Google. So I have this, what is this browser? Brave browser. Inside a Brave browser, I open this. What this browser? We call that browser as a client. Okay, the browser, inside a browser only we are opening site, right? When you open the site, the browser sends a request. Browser sends a request. Browser sends a request to server Google, and it will send response back to the client. And if you search for any query, again that will go as a request to the server, and the query response will be back to you in a response. So what protocol these browsers and the what protocol the web is operated upon? HTTP. And here now Web3, the types of versions of web protocols are also there. Now we are actually the in the emerging era of Web3. And the way they operate, which is protocol operates on TCP, where this protocol HTTP protocol operates on top of TCP, which is connectionless protocol. You can see here the version 1.1 and version 2 and version 3, where this is actually the emerging technology now, where the Web3 is on top of based on the HTTP protocol. But however, these different actually protocols added, this in version 3, there are some added headers are there, uh, and the new methods are added. So what these methods are, or we call them as HTTP verbs, and how they are operated, and we will see how they work. So how this thing actually works, if I actually type something as a query, let me go it to you. Good. So for this browser, for all of these types of browsers, so if you go to the browser, and we can do some magic here. If you click on inspect or inspect source, that will open as a new tab, and this contains actually lot of other things are there, like a console, source, network, performance, memory, application security, and lighthouse. And so what we actually, this whatever you see, this is actually the source code of this website, which means that, for suppose if I go here, you see this Google, this particular tag is making up that Google there. If I go and actually right click, and I can click on delete element, and that is gone. Can you see? And if I go here, there's actually button here. You see there's a style, and this is a header, and there's a button here. I can highlight, and you see this is a button. And if I click on actually delete that one, and that is gone. So we call it as a HTML, stands for hypertext markup language. So this is not an actual language as other traditional languages like Python, C. It doesn't support any logic. It doesn't support writing any functionality, which is just a markup language. We use tags to describe the formatting of our page, how this should be displayed and where should be displayed. And we use styles. For suppose here, I have this with little icon. Using this icon, I can select anything. And let's say I don't want this thing to be displayed here, and I want the background to be red, and I can use just a red, or I can, instead of a background, I can put any color. See, I changed the aqua white, black, blue, and gray. This one, I changed this color. This one looks better. Can you see how it is done? So we call it as a style. We call them as a cascading. CSS stands for cascading style sheet. We call them as a styles. So by applying styles to the elements and we give them a color and position, I can put this element position top. Sorry. And you see here, I'm changing that position. Hello. So I can put so we are actually not learning here any CSS, HTML. So the goal is how it operates. So I changed that position. Now this is how actually websites are. So this is called a markup language, which describes using these tags and how they are actually positioned, the way they are positioned, and there are a lot of tags here. The div, style, and form, button, input, anchor, a, and a paragraph. There are a lot of other tags, and each tag describes a kind of item. This is the input, so that this is described wherever we take the input, uh, we call that as an input element, and we can make custom inputs as well as using other elements, generic elements like a div. And where these are buttons, you can see here, these are buttons. And these can be anchor tags describing in links. When we actually click on that something, and if it actually taking us to somewhere, we call them as anchor. So the links, they are called hyperlinks. So this is our, but we need a way this whole thing needs to, we need a way how this whole thing actually is communicated. So suppose if I refreshed, I got it back because the whatever I changed is actually from client side only, because how it is displayed in a client, the browser. Where, like I said, where here at we as we have seen here, the Chrome, the browser, which can be a Chrome, Brave, or anything, you type something and send. How it is sent? It is sent as a request. First, request goes, and from server, what we get? Response. So, and for this request, and we get that from server, HTTP or response, and it is actually request. So for suppose we can see how this HTML, what I said, HTML, hypertext markup language. So how this is communicated, we need a medium for this actually HTML markup language to be communicated. The markup text, that HTML and CSS, all that JavaScript needs to be communicated. So if a client requests something and server responds with this whole content, so that what browser does, browser reads everything and actually renders the page. So how browser acts, the when it receives something, okay, there is a form. Okay, so this is a form. You can see here, if I delete this thing, whole search box is deleted. So okay, there's a form, so that I should display something like this box. And there is a button here, I should display. Actually, you can see here, if I go to Google search, and there is actually center, and then you see text here, label Google, value Google search. I change this thing Google search to search my name. You see it is changed, Google my name. which means that you are not making any change on server side. It is client side only. What browser is displayed. So whatever the browser gets from the server, that is being rendered, displayed like this. It understands this language, particular, markup language. Markup means that whole content is actually, it chooses the markup syntax where to actually describe it is a div, to display it is in a center, to actually describe it is an input of type button or something like that. Based on that, it is kind of language browser understands. By understanding, so by passing this whole HTML, so where browser, it under browser, all browsers understand this HTML, and the browsers pass this HTML and display the page accordingly. So we call it, the process is called rendering. So the way page is rendered accordingly, the where the, since value is say Google my name, the here that is displayed. So where if you go here, I'm lucky, okay. So instead of actually change, I'm feeling lucky to test me, so I changed. So how this content is actually comes from server, a browser passes that and displays this whole content accordingly like that. So we need a medium to communicate this all the uh, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So what do we need? So for browser to work, we need all these things. Sorry, for website to work, where HTML defines a document, and styles CSS defines the presentation, and JavaScript defines the functionality. Where so if you go here, so just a kind of see how it is. Let's say that you saw HTML is like where the skeleton. So CSS is like a displaying presentation. If you don't see any CSS, if you put up any CSS, it's like a just a document without any presentation, without any actually beauty added to it. And the JavaScript is like adding presentation, where if I click on actually sending data to the server, or animating, or playing some animation effects, or if I go actually hover on any mouse, or actually doing any functionality like a counter or anything. So for suppose the where I'll show it to you how CSS works. Let's say that, let's go to little tools, and if I go, let's go to IP address space. If I go here, click on inspect, and so where we have some CSS, let's go, and this is called styles, where you can turn off, keep on actually turning off those styles. So you are disabling. And do you see here the page without style, without CSS how it looks, which is very primitive. And can you see here the whole page without styles? So this is how it looks, where without a presentation, without a style applied. So we make up actually the website front end web application first made in a HTML, and then the styles are applied. If I want to this button to be displayed green, bulky, or a thin line, less border, or a gray background, all those things we apply using styles, CSS. And then if we have actually any functionality, clicking on anything, this is the functionality where if I click on change the slider, numbers are getting changed. That functionality is added using JavaScript. To communicate this whole thing, so we use a protocol, application layer protocol called HTTP. What is that? HTTP, hypertext transfer protocol, which is application layer protocol, which means that it operates on top of, which is HTTP, and it is application layer, and the underlying in a TCP/IP model, let's say that if HTTP is application layer underlying the transport layer protocol it uses is called a TCP. There are two types of transport layer protocols, TCP and UDP, and it uses the transport layer protocol. The TCP as a transport, and the HTTP is application layer protocol. So how HTTP works? The HTTP has the one protocol means set of rules and standard. What is a COVID protocol? You should wear a mask, use sanitizer, and follow actually at least 2 meters distance. That is a protocol. These are some rules. So where common ground all people agree upon. So likewise, the where what this protocol, where this client and server, the both actually agree upon how they communicate HTTP protocol. By means of this HTTP protocol, this HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all are communicated. Not just using this protocol, the all the and JSON or XML or any data from server to the client or client to the server is communicated. Where client can actually send some data to the server and server will respond back. For suppose here, I'll show you an example here. Let's say if let's go to our Google. If I actually go to the network where we can see all the requests made. So for suppose if I set something, you see, as soon as I click on send this thing, the browser sent already some requests. And if I actually, this is called a payload. Payload means this what browser sends to the server, we call it as actually payload, the content. And response, if you see response, if I click on response, where if you see here, if we decode the response and whatever we see here, you see whatever the suggestions we see here, that suggestions are actually came from the server. Can you see here difference between HTML, CSS, and JavaScript core, and where it is displayed? Can you see here? You see here difference between HTML, JavaScript, tabular form. Can you see? This content is actually from the server, and as soon as I placed the cursor in this input box, it sent a request to the server, and server responded back with a response. For suppose let's clear this thing. If I send the how internet or web works, yeah, a lot of requests are going to post and get, and let's say that if I click on search, and there you go, yeah, this content, whole content came, request sent to the server, and if I click on payload, it's a preview, and this is what you see. This whole content is actually came from the server with for a different requests and responses, and that whole data is actually consolidated and together, and this client, whatever the script, and that actually makes this web page look like this. Anyway, so you can see here the query we sent, which is a request. You can clearly see how browser displays a request. If you go here, headers, do you see response headers from the server? And if you scroll down, you do you see request headers? Yes, you can see. And where do you see the response? This is a response came from the server. You can see here. So what is these headers? What are these headers and payload and response? Because this is how this our HTTP protocol is structured. HTTP protocol contains how this protocol is structured. It is actually made up of both headers and body, and that body is also called a payload. So it is this whole request, either request or response is divided into two things. One is headers. Another one is a body or a payload. So this can be a request. This can be a request or response. So when request is what headers describe about this mostly kind of metadata, or it describes about the kind of request it is making, or kind of site from which it is the request is sent. And what is body? If you see here, body contains the actual content or data that is either sent to the server or coming from server back to the client. So as you can see here, if you actually go, let's go here. Let's take this our let's say if I can find any. If I can find anything that uses typically a server response from the server. Most of the tools, yeah. So this is for you to understand. So as a web developer takes care of front end web developer takes care of building a front end application website, whatever it displayed inside, and backend takes care of creating business logic for the website. Backend developer, which is used Python, Django, or Ruby on Rails or Flask. The what QA engineers takes care of. QA engineers takes care of just testing, where actually whether if it is a functional testing or non-functional testing. So if it is a functional testing, whether the functionality is working or not using different tests like regression, acceptance, smoke, and sanity tests. Where they actually, if it is a manual testing, what they do, they go and actually click on anything, and if it is a slide, and if it should work, actually slide up, and if all items are being displayed properly, all input and output. Yes. So that is they take care of, actually QA engineers take care of the testing. QA engineers don't worry about writing a code for the front end or writing a code for the back end, but having this idea about how this request response works and how this web works, and actually is added advantage for the bonus for a human engineer. Sometimes yes, for suppose sometimes backend developers don't have a knowledge about the how to create a front end website, and same as for front same applies to the front end developers, where they may not have knowledge about how backend application is created, how to create. So likewise, co-engineers may not have actually idea about how these two things are made, how what technologies are used. But having a knowledge actually will help you how this website operates. And because when you test API testing, when you perform API testing, you essentially need how the web operates, how HTTP operates. So for that, we use different tools here. So let's say that if I take let me take actually a simple tool, base 64 converter. I use let's say the base 64 converter. I'm using this random website, okay, and hopefully it chooses from the server to show you how it works actually. If I actually hello world, and I click on, actually this is the code, and can you see, you can see here the request is sent to the server, and a preview, can you see in a preview this website, and you see the preview inside in a preview, you can see here the same response that is actually loaded here. So how it works here, the request is made. What kind of request is made here? Post, get, and these are different types of requests. If I click on anything, if you see here, like I said, every request is made up of headers and body. So if you headers and body are part of both request and response here. So if you see the request headers, these are all request headers. These are all request headers. These are all. And so each request header is actually separated by HTTP. They actually are separated by new line. Each all headers are. And what separates this header and body? So it's over slash or slash n. So basically slash or slash n. Basically two new lines actually separate, or a slash or slash n. So that separates basically header and body. So slash n stands for a new line, which is In programming, if you print slash and using Python or JavaScript, it just simply prints the new line. So how new line is represented using character escape sequences. So some platforms use a slash and some platforms use a slash or slash and. Where in the for HTTP protocol, two slash or slash ands, this CRL carriage return and line feed. It is referred as CRLN. So two CRLNs actually separate the headers and body. So, whenever browser encounters this CRLN twice, and it it recognizes that as actually starting point of body. So you can see here where these are request headers, and what is a payload, which is a you can see input in a payload. What is sent here? Input. So which means that in the body, what is sent in a form. If you see the form, this is how it is sent. We call it as a URL form encoded, and you can see here the character set UTF-8. If I change this thing and if I put ASCII and if I put ASCII, clear this thing and click on a decode, and you can see here the change again. And if you go here, payload, and now it is changed to ASCII, as you can see here. So we have input hello world and ASCII. And what is response? Anything comes from the server, which is actually response. And only response you see here. What comes from the server is actually HTML. Essentially, you can see here that is in the body. And if you actually preview that thing, because how it is previewed, we have different tags and a color and actually band form, these are all actually make up what is previewed here. And if you see the preview, you can see here the input hello world, and this is a character type character set, change it to ASCII, and output here E plus. So this response is came from the server, but the response headers, we see them here all as if just above the request headers. You can see here these are the response headers. So the response headers, they describe what content is actually the from server, what encoding it is actually, what is date time, what server it is actually. Server is Nginx, what kind of web server is serving a request and responses, and the response contains actual content. So that is how actually once the content is received by the client, actually client passes that HTML, CSS, and anything, and renders that is displayed in a browser. And let's say that during this process, if server requires any data from the server, for suppose user details, let's say that you wanted to access your mails, or this, let's say some details information stored, your your notes, or any details, or your user details, anything. Let's say that if you take university module also, your login details, uh, your login details, or as well as your grades are stored in database. So if those grades are requested, let's say that those are stored in a database. And how they when they are actually stored in database, so if that data is required to serve the particular request, first request comes from the server. Let's say to serve this request, some data, some information is required from the database, and that information is actually requested using SQL statement. If we say, assuming this is actually RDBMS, so that request using the SQL query, a statement, and response is actually sent using in a SQL query, in response by executing the query, and if the data is available, and it is sent to the server. What server does, it process that data and puts the data in a response, and by putting that data in a response, it is sent back to the presentation layer or a client. This can be a client. So if for static sites, they may not. For static sites, let's say that is not having any data, just information. So we may not need actually the database layer, a data layer. So, but a dynamic sites like the where actually information processing, where requesting grades are stored, or your password information, let's say that you are using, and your data, anything. So let's say that you are using some to-do applications, all your to-do list is actually stored on server, so fetching those details according to the user. So we use those details are requested if they are stored in RDBMS, and the database responds back with that query, select query, and this server, application server puts the data. If it uses templating, or else if it is actually using JSON API, RESTful API if it is providing, and constructing proper API response, and it will respond back to the client. Client will render that information. And this is called a stateless protocol. HTTP is a stateless protocol, HTTP, which is called stateless. Why it is stateless? Because for every request and response, once request is sent to the server, and the client wait on that request, and once that request is served by the particular application web server, and connection is disconnected when response is received. So connection is disconnected when response is received from server, because there is no, actually there won't be any persistent connection. Once the response is served, request is served, connection is disconnected. So that next request that any client or browser makes will not have any stateful information. For that reason, we use something called special files that are stored in a browser. They are called cookies. So those cookies, based on the cookies, a server identifies who is the user, or what is the browser client that is making a request, and we can see all of that information here. If I go to the application, we can see all of that information, what cookies are there. For suppose if I go to the cookies here, we call them as cookies, and if you click on that particular domain, it is using particular this cookie, where for every request this cookie is sent to the server. And we can verify that here if we go to the network also. In a request header also, you can see here in a request header, we can see that particular cookie. So that particular cookie, that random number or any text that is stored locally, that is sent in every request that is made by the browser for all following requests from which the request is, this cookie is set. But initially, the server itself offers the cookie to be stored in a client, and in all following requests, that cookie is sent to the server, and that is cookie is sent as a part of cookie header. And how these headers are actually formulated, the each header contains the one key and a value. So these are like a header key and the value. So these all keys are according to the standard, and the value describes what the content is. For suppose this cookie is a key, the value is actually the header, the actual cookie that is stored in a for particular site. So based on these cookies only, actually your sites identifies basically who you are. For suppose if you log in, a particular cookie is sent, and this is how actually web attacks, actually some attacks also happen, where cookie hijacking or session hijacking, where someone can steal from cookie from browser and inject that to their browser, and simply bang, they can start using your account. So that is how actually web works. And what are the different HTTP requests and all, we will see. What are different HTTP webs that are get, put, post, delete, and those things we will see.